I've talked about the RFK assassination from so many different angles. This is new because you actually, I mean, you're not arguing that, there was a second gunman, or that he was hypnotized, the lady in the polka dot dress, or that the forensic investigation into the audio tapes, and that there were 13 shots fired, not 8. You're focusing in on the defense, the mistakes that were made in his defense for diminished capacity, and you're applying some new psychological tools to this case, correct? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's a good assessment, actually. So I entered the case as a graduate student at UC Berkeley when my major the psychiatrist who was the consultant for Sirhan's defense team was my major professor at Berkeley. So from time to time, he would go over the case, and particularly he would discuss what the defense was and what the strategies were to try and save Sirhan from the gas chamber. So there were many conversations that I had with Dr. Diamond, who was also my advisor. So I had to listen to him at the time. I couldn't disagree with him too much. So that's how I entered the case. And as you say, framing the case has been very interesting over 50 years, because there's been lots of different competing theories as to who did it, how was it executed, who was involved in the assassination, the notion of hypnosis that you bring up, that does figure in, but from a little different perspective. My focus, really, after 50 years, I've written a lot of other books, but after 50 years and seeing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., when he had his interview with Sirhan, it really triggered something in my thinking that, maybe RFK Jr. has a point. Maybe the person that he was talking to wasn't the person that actually assassinated his father. So I started going over my notes on the case and came up with different diagnostic opinions of who Sirhan was and who actually Robert Kennedy Jr. was speaking to at the time that he interviewed him in San Diego in prison. So I put my notes together and came up with new diagnostic categories that weren't really available 50 years ago, especially the criminological diagnoses concerning why Sirhan, in my opinion, drifted into this lane that, regardless of your perspective on the case, he was standing there with a loaded gun, firing 8 shots, hitting 6 people, one of them being Kennedy. So how did he get there? In criminology, there's a whole theory of tracing how people get to a certain point in time where they commit a crime. It's called criminal sequencing. And criminal sequencing is what I tried to use to retro-analyze Sirhan's behavior, and his young behavior. He was 24 when this happened. So what accounted for him standing there with a gun and firing at RFK?
Just so I'm clear on this, when you look at those other aspects of the case that I mentioned, some have argued that the bullet from Kennedy's neck didn't match the bullet from Sirhan's Ivor Johnson 8-shot 22 caliber pistol. Some have argued that the real gunman was standing directly behind Kennedy, Thane Eugene Caesar, and there were powder burns and so forth on the back of RFK's, I guess, behind his ear and so forth, and the Thomas Noguchi autopsy, all of that stuff. Do you just say, okay, let's just park that for, and let me just focus on what we do know and what we can prove? I mean, or do you just see that sort of as noise, all of these other theories, before you sort of dove into this investigation?
No, I don't think it's noise. I mean, I think that anybody who is taken is a serious truth seeker to look at the elements of the case, they could come up with alternative perspectives. What I've done for 40 years is study criminal behavior, particularly a variety of different murderers. The interesting notion that I came up with after all of these investigations and court ordered to understand why somebody committed a murder is that sometimes people don't know. I mean, there's a whole subterranean area of consciousness that some people are unaware of. So when I looked at Sirhan, I thought there's something that is happening, that happened to him, that put him into this trajectory that's even unknown to him. So when Dr. Diamond, he told the jury that the interpretation of this case was so preposterous that it really wouldn't even fit into a Hollywood B movie script. Well, what does that mean? It means that it's so convoluted and so buried into Sirhan's unconscious behavior that Sirhan doesn't know, and Dr. Diamond was scratching the surface, coming up with his diagnostic opinion, which was dissociative reaction. Now, what's a dissociative reaction? It's Sirhan creating a separate entity, a separate personality when he was about age 12, based on his trauma. And today, the area of traumatology is huge. 50 years ago, it wasn't so huge. So my analysis concludes that at age 12, he carved out what he thought was a safe space because he was in Palestine. What was Palestine or East Jerusalem became Jordan. He was trapped in this war zone where he saw all this mayhem, blood, people dead, his brother run over by a military truck. He created what he thought was a safe space, and in turn, he began to identify, excuse me, with those people who were the aggressors. So he turned this psychologically around to where he now becomes the aggressor. If you look at sexual molestation cases, 9 chances out of 10, you're going to find that the molester was a person who himself or herself was molested as a child. So they become the victim turned into perpetrator. This is exactly what I think happened to Sirhan in the second personality, which was called a multiple personality at the time.
Right.
He translated, or he moved all of this anger and hostility towards, at the time, the British mandate, the Israelis, the Israeli army, all the oppressors when he was 12 years old. If you skip forward 12 years, and he begins to identify with his future aggressor, which is RFK.
Right. And RFK had gone to Israel, had expressed support for Israel, and it's reported that Sirhan, had told other people for many years that he was going to kill, that he wanted to kill Robert F. Kennedy. So, I mean, we've known for dissociative disorder for some time, right? We're familiar with, the case of Sybil that was highly publicized on television and so forth. What did they understand dissociative disorder back in 1968?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned the Sybil case, because Sybil came a little after the diagnosis of Sirhan. But the Sybil case was a complete fraud. It was set up by 3 women to make money, and make money they did. So they had convinced the patient that she had multiple personalities. The Dr. Wilbur, the treating psychiatrist, treating in air quotes, she conditioned the patient using sodium amytal, using drugs to create the second personality. The offshoot was that the miniseries was one of the best watched miniseries on TV, and made millions of dollars, plus Sybil dolls, Sybil dresses. So it was a fraud. In the back of Dr. Diamond's mind, he didn't know about Sybil, but he knew that this was a controversial diagnosis. The real foundational case was the Three Faces of Eve. Thiepin and Cleckley's, two psychiatrists from Kansas, that really zeroed in on what a multiple personality was. They identified Eve White, Eve Black as the two personalities. In their study, what they found, and other people have found since then, including George Estabrook, that was a very well-known hypnotherapist, that usually there is a good personality and one that's not so good. So I always tell the story, if I'm giving a talk on this, that what if I told you a story of a person that had one personality that was pretty good and a second personality that wasn't so good. The second personality committed murder, but the first personality didn't understand it. What would you think? And usually they say, well, that's hard to believe. But that's what dissociative personality disorder or multiple personality disorder was at the time that Dr. Diamond and the other doctors kind of confused the issue.
All right. Let's take a time out. When we come back, we'll find out, what other perhaps errors were made in the defense of Sirhan Sirhan that could have spared him a trip to San Quentin's death row. Of course, the death sentence was commuted, but he remains in prison 56 years after the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy.